Chapter 3. Race through the deep blackness. Prudence turned left and picked her way along the uneven surface of the dirt road, feeling secure in the glow of her flashlight. As she rounded the corner, the first streetlight greeted her. She turned off her flashlight and walked towards the village square. "Woo!" she screamed, and brandished her machete. The tension suddenly drained from her body and she started to laugh. "Scared me half to death," she exclaimed, after she'd controlled herself. She waited. The mongoose did not reappear. If it had, she would have certainly returned home. It was night. She was not going to take any chances. The village square was at an intersection. She had 3 roads from which to choose. She stared up the hill in front of her. To its left was the edge of the cemetery. There was no streetlight on that road. She had no reason to go up there during daylight hours, and she would not venture up there at night. As far as she knew, Constance had no reason to go up there, but if she'd gone up there, she'd have to find her way down, the same way she'd got up there. Prudence glanced at the edge of the cemetery closest to the road. The glow of the light from the street lamp under which she stood didn't do much to hide its spookiness. Should she turn right? Could Constance be up there? But why should she be up there? Better to make sure. Prudence walked up the road, passing darkened trees, shrubbery, and buildings before reaching the school. She wouldn't go beyond that point. If Constance had, she was stupid. She glanced at the wall of darkness beyond where she stood, then turned to head back down the road. Back at the intersection, she stopped. Should she cross back over the footbridge and go home? Constance was a big woman, as she rightly said. She could take care of herself. What possessed me to leave my yard? Bout am I looking for Constance? Anybody see am I dying trial? A cool breeze wafted over her and snatched her words. She shivered and took a few steps towards the footbridge, but a voice in her head stopped her. "Why don't you walk down the road?" Prudence turned down the road. She passed the darkened cemetery to her right. Her relatives were there, but she didn't think about them at that moment. The murmur of the river below the left side of the road, the chirping of crickets and the indistinct night noises accompanied her as she lengthened her steps. She didn't bother to turn on her flashlight. She was in the center of the village. What bad could happen? The clang of metal hitting the side of the bridge ahead of her caused her to jump. She flicked the switch on her flashlight. For a second, the clanging of metal reminded her of the stories of rolling calves that she'd heard when she was a child, calves with their chains loose, wandering up and down the streets looking for people to scare, devils in the shape of calves running around at nights, up to no good. She aimed the flashlight in the direction of the sound. A ghostly form emerged from the misty darkness. The cemetery was to her right, and to her left was the road leading down to the river. As the shadowy figure neared her, she gripped the handle of her machete that she held close to her leg. The figure sidled up to her and peered down at her. "Are you that, Miss Prudence? You taking a little walk?" Jonah asked, laughing and caressing the blade of his machete. Prudence in one glance took in his knotted head of hair and beard, his bright eyes, his stained merino filled with holes, his khaki shorts held at the waist by a piece of string, and his big dirty feet. She cleared her throat and tightened her grip on the handle of her machete. "Evening, Jonah." "Yes, just walking," she said, trying to smile. Jonah smiled down at her, showing her his browned teeth. "A right, Miss Prudence. Just walking myself. Nice night." He tucked the machete under his left arm and skipped up the road, whistling as he went. Prudence exhaled. "Lord, look what Constance put me in, eh? Suppose the devil had got into that man's head tonight?" She glanced over her shoulder. The darkness had swallowed Jonah. She quickened her steps. At the junction, she stopped. Straight ahead was pitch blackness. Except for people who lived down there, nobody in their right mind would go there at night, she thought. She turned left. Nobody in their right mind should be going up here either, but I am not turning back. Not tempting fate tonight, she muttered. There was no streetlight on that stretch of road. She rounded the first corner and stopped. One of her mother's stories had chosen that blessed moment to pop into her head. She couldn't shake it. According to her mother, when she was a child, she was returning home from the shop one night when she saw a tall man dressed in white and wearing a red turban standing in the middle of the narrow track. She turned to run back the way that she'd come, but the man was standing in front of her. He'd said nothing. He'd just looked at her. She turned to the other end of the road, but he'd been there, too. When she'd realized that she'd been trapped, she'd closed her eyes, bulldozed her way through him and sprinted home, swearing at the top of her voice. Prudence inhaled. She had no plans to run from anything that night. Even if she wanted to, she didn't think she could. Her age wouldn't allow it, she thought. A darkened wall of close-packed trees extended up the hill to her right and, to her left, darkened trees lined the bank that ran along that side of the road. She plodded on, ignoring every movement or whisper of a movement. She felt like she was walking through a cave, being serenaded by the music of the night. Wonder if Constance reach home yet, she mused. Wonder if she realized that I not there. Probably she there, wrap up in her warm bed, while I am walking in the night dew, in this pitch-black night, getting myself sick. Some people only think about themselves, but I can't live like that. I have to think about other people. Prudence reached another junction and turned down the hill. To her right, down a ravine, darkness hid silent houses. She passed other silent houses on either side of the road. She didn't look in the direction of those houses. She concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. 3/4 of the way down that hill, she reached her steps. "We meet again, Miss Prudence," a voice cut through the darkness. Prudence's heart leapt. She shone her flashlight in the direction of the voice. Not Jonah again. He was jogging up the road on which she'd walked down to the village square. She waited for him. "Yes, we meet again," she said, when he reached her. What more could she say? She couldn't ask him where he was going. That was none of her business. He could spend the night walking, if that was what he wanted to do. She wanted to climb her steps, but she was not going to turn her back on him. "Only me and you on the road tonight, Miss Prudence. Nice night. I see that you walk with your machete, too," he said, admiring her machete and smiling. She followed his stare, and when she looked up, he was holding his machete out to her. She flinched. "You see dis," he said, his voice earnest. "A walk with it all the time. You never know when you are to defend yourself." He smiled at her, nodded, and seemed to be waiting for a response. "True. You never know," Prudence agreed, her eyes focused on the machete. "Good night, Miss Prudence. Going to walk some more," he said, and skipped up the road. Prudence watched him until he disappeared into the darkness. Huffing and puffing, she planted one foot in front of the other and pulled herself up each step. She scaled the final step and paused to catch her breath. Everything seemed to be just as she'd left it, except for Rover yapping and jumping around her. Rover belonged to Rose, who lived on the opposite hill. "You enjoying the best of both worlds," she told him, and stooped to pat his fat belly. She was about to straighten when something to the left of her vision caught her attention. What was that now? Was that a person or the cat or a banana leaf waving in the wind? Or was it just her imagination? In spite of herself, her heart raced. It couldn't be anything threatening, she told herself. Rover was right there and he wasn't barking. Prudence turned her head to where she'd sensed the movement. "I can go to bed now that you come home," Constance said, and moved out of the shadows, Colonel in her arms. Prudence raised her body in slow motion. "You can go to bed now that I am home? You can go to bed now that I am home?" She stood glaring at Constance, clutching her flashlight in one hand and her machete in the other. She didn't try to quell the rage that bubbled up inside her. Constance moved into the light. "What you going on about? You left and did not tell me you were leaving. I have more right to be annoyed right now than you," she said, her tone mild. "You have a right to be annoyed." "What right? You were the one who almost snapped my head off. You said you were going to bed. Why didn't you go to bed?" Without waiting for a response, Prudence strode to the back veranda. She needed to get out of the night air. Constance followed. "I am sorry about snapping at you," she said. "I have a lot on my mind at this time and you just keep on nagging. That will cause any Christian to cuss." Prudence swallowed her response and pushed open the back door. She headed to the living room and threw herself on the couch. "Where were you, Constance?" she asked after she'd controlled her breathing. "I searched the whole house and you were not inside." I am sure that everybody who live round here heard me calling you. Where you go?
I heard you.
I just didn't feel like answering. I wanted a bit of fresh air, so I went up to the old house. I saw you when you were leaving. Where you go at this hour of the night? Prudence sent up a silent prayer. Sometimes she wished they were children again when she could slap some sense into Constance. Breathe, Prudence. Just breathe, a voice urged her. Prudence tried to control herself. Constance, we have to do better. Do you know that I walked through the whole community looking for you? Oh my goodness. You alone wandering the streets at night? I wouldn't be so stupid as to go on the street at night and not say a word to anybody, not with all those ganja babies running wild. You never know what they will do. I am so sorry that I didn't say something when you were leaving. If anything had happened to you, it would have been my fault. You sorry? You know who I meet on the road tonight? 2 times in one night. Jonah. Of all the people to meet at night. Jonah. Mad Jonah. You meet Mad Jonah down the road. I don't know what I would do if it was me, Constance said, through her laughter. You never wet yourself. Prudence snorted. When you didn't answer me when I called you, I don't know what I thought, but I went to look for you. And you saw me leaving and didn't say a word, Constance. What wrong with you? Constance shrugged and caressed Colonel. Not a thing wrong with me, Prudence. Stop blaming me for your stupidity, running around at night. Mad just like Jonah. Good night. You keep me up long enough. She cuddled her cat, murmured in his ear and left Prudence sitting on the sofa. Prudence replaced the cushion that she clutched. Why don't I learn? Worrying about people who don't worry about themselves. She'd forgotten everything about the house up the hill. And how should she have known that Constance had gone up there? Constance had abandoned that house. If she'd just glanced towards the archway, she would have seen her, but Constance wouldn't be the first person that she would have thought of if she'd seen the silhouette of a fair-skinned woman looking at her out of the darkness. Probably she would have scared herself to death. Don't worry about anything, she told herself, and patted her thigh. I am all right now. The walk was good for me.